Naomi Ellis had exposed CEOs, lobbyists, and politicians, but nothing prepared her for the moment she stepped out of a black car and into a blinding wall of camera flashes. Wearing a designer gown, a six-figure diamond ring, and Julian Blackridge's last name. "Naomi, did you really marry the man you tried to destroy? Are you still a journalist? Is this love or blackmail?" The questions pelted her like bullets. Naomi didn't flinch. She had mastered the art of silence. A perfectly timed glance, a faint smile, and the trained stillness of someone who'd walked through fire without letting the flames touch her. What no one knew, not the screaming paparazzi, not even Julian himself, was that just 21 days ago, she had sat in a cheap motel room in Queens, staring at a USB drive labeled Blackridge, 4 years, 3 foundations, 2 shell companies, 1 lie. She wasn't here to fall in love. She was here for revenge, or at least, she thought she was. Naomi had once believed the truth would set people free, until the day her editor pulled her first story about Julian Blackridge, without warning. "We're not touching this one," he had said flatly. "The Blackridge Foundation just pledged $2 million to the newsroom." She was suspended a week later, unpaid. That was the day she stopped trusting institutions and started trusting herself. 3 years later, Naomi had built a following through anonymous exposés on corruption in New York's elite. No name, no face, just truth. Raw. Undeniable. So when whispers began circulating that Blackridge Global Ventures was funneling charity money into private tech ventures in Dubai, she didn't wait for approval. She found a way in. As Nora Evans, a freelance communications consultant, Naomi infiltrated Julian's PR team with forged credentials and a burner phone. Her mission was clear. Get close, get proof, get out. But on her 3rd day, she miscalculated. It wasn't the hidden surveillance cam she planted in the executive suite. It wasn't the burner email she used to leak draft tax filings to an offshore contact. It was the moment Julian Blackridge himself walked past her in the hallway, then stopped. "You're not from Mercer & Co., are you?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with something sharper than suspicion. "Your resume says you speak French. Say something." Naomi blinked. "In French?" she asked, buying time. He nodded. She smiled coolly. "Je parle la vérité mieux que la flatterie." "I speak truth better than flattery." A pause. Then he smirked. "That's not the answer someone trying to lie would give," he said. "But you're still not who you say you are." That evening, a letter slid under her hotel door. From Julian Blackridge. Subject, proposal. "You're not the first person who tried to dig into me, but you're the first who didn't lie well enough. So let's stop pretending. Here's my offer. 1 year. You pretend to be my fiancé. You smile for the press. You don't publish anything. I pay you $350,000, wired in full. You walk away clean. No lawsuits, no ruined career, no federal subpoenas. Do it because you need the money, or do it because you don't want to see what I can really do. Either way, we both win." Naomi stared at the letter for a long time. It wasn't just the money. It was what it meant to fake everything she believed in. Truth, exposure, justice, for a paycheck. It was a deal with the devil. Except, something in Julian's offer didn't smell like power. It smelled like desperation. And Naomi had learned to follow the scent of fear more than fame. She signed the NDA 3 days later. She moved into his penthouse 1 week after that. And now, standing in front of the flashing cameras, Naomi Ellis, the girl who once got blacklisted for trying to bring Julian Blackridge down, was now the one wearing his ring. And no one, not even Julian, knew that the biggest secret she held had nothing to do with journalism. Not anymore. The penthouse was a masterpiece of minimalist wealth. Glass, marble, and silence. Naomi's heels clicked too loud on the polished floors, like the sound of someone trespassing on a dream she didn't ask for. "This is where you'll sleep," Julian said casually, gesturing to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment in Brooklyn. Naomi didn't respond. She was too busy calculating how many burner phones she could hide in here without looking suspicious. "There's no camera in here, if that's what you're wondering," he added, his tone dry. Naomi turned, arms crossed. "You really think I came here to film you in your sleep?" Julian tilted his head, studying her like a chessboard. "I think you came here to expose me. I'm just not sure what you're hoping to find." She didn't answer. Because the truth was, neither did she. The next morning, her phone buzzed with the press coordination memo from Julian's assistant. Monday, breakfast photo op at the Central Park Conservancy. Tuesday, interview with Modern Legacy magazine. New York's unlikely power couple. Thursday, wedding dress fitting with Dior's private atelier team. It was all happening. Too fast. Too real. She wasn't a journalist anymore. She was the story. And God, she hated it. But Julian? He was infuriatingly unreadable. No late-night drunken confessions. No secret burner phone. No temper tantrums. Just carefully timed silence and perfectly scripted gestures. He poured her coffee with 2 sugars. He remembered she didn't like elevators. He waited for her to sit first before every meeting with the PR team. Was it all a performance? Or was there something he wasn't pretending? One night, Naomi caught him on the rooftop, staring out at the city like it owed him something. "You know," she said, approaching him, "for someone who orchestrated a fake marriage, you sure don't seem interested in making it look real." Julian didn't turn around. "Because I'm not interested in pretending. I'm interested in surviving." His voice was quieter than usual. Not icy, not guarded, just human. She stepped closer, watching his profile under the rooftop lights. Surviving what? Julian turned, and for a moment the mask slipped. "The board, the media, my own last name. Take your pick." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded page. "Recognize this?" Naomi's breath caught. It was the draft of her old article. The one that got her suspended. The one that was never supposed to see the light of day again. "You were sloppy," he said. "You left a copy in your cloud." Naomi snatched the page from his hand. "You had no right." "I read it," he interrupted. "All of it." She stared at him, bracing for the threat, the smugness, the power play. But he just said, "You were right." That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. He wasn't supposed to say that. He wasn't supposed to agree with her. And he definitely wasn't supposed to look like a man who wasn't afraid of being exposed, but afraid of being believed. She looked around the penthouse. It was cold. Too clean. Like a life built to keep people out, not invite them in. Was Julian Blackridge really the villain of this story? Or just another survivor playing a part? The next morning, as she got into the waiting SUV for the Modern Legacy interview, Naomi caught her reflection in the tinted glass. Flawless makeup, pearl earrings, a white blouse that screamed, "High Society Wife." But inside, she was still a woman with a flash drive full of receipts, and a heart that had no idea what side it was on anymore. Naomi had been in dozens of boardrooms, but nothing prepared her for the one on the 71st floor of Blackridge Global Ventures. The windows were taller than church walls. The table could seat 20, and every seat was filled by someone who smiled too much and blinked too little. Julian sat at the head, expression unreadable. Naomi sat to his right, silent but alert, scanning every file handed to her like a bomb might fall out of the stapled corners. "The press is asking about the Meridia Foundation again," one board member said, flipping through a stack of papers. "Tell them we've donated over $6 million to international food programs," another offered. "We don't have to get specific." But Naomi had already read the numbers, and none of them added up. Later that night, in the penthouse, she cracked open a locked drawer in Julian's home office while he was in the shower. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct, and instinct never lied. Inside were 2 sets of donation ledgers. One, the polished version made for investors and PR. The other, a confidential spreadsheet titled Authorized Transfers, V. Blackridge. V. Blackridge, not Julian. Vivian, Naomi froze. Vivian Blackridge, Julian's adoptive mother. Former senator. Public health reformist. CNN darling. And apparently, the architect behind multiple offshore charity accounts used to funnel millions to shell companies tied to defense contracts. She felt sick. All this time she thought Julian was the front, the fraud, the figurehead. But he was just the son. The real puppeteer was a woman with her own Wikipedia page and 3 honorary degrees. Julian walked in, toweling his hair, shirt half-buttoned. "Looking for something?" he asked, too calm. Naomi held up the folder. "You know about this?" His jaw tightened. He walked to the window, staring out into the Manhattan night. "She built this company's legacy. She raised me after my father died. And every time I tried to pull away, she reminded me that my name isn't just Julian, it's Blackridge." "So yes," he added. "I know." Naomi's voice was cold. "Then why lie to the public? Why cover for her?" He turned, meeting her eyes for the first time that night. "Because she knows how to destroy people. She doesn't just ruin careers. She buries them. A silence hung between them, thick with unspoken truths. Julian stepped closer. "You think I'm protecting myself with this fake marriage, Naomi? But I'm protecting you." She didn't believe him. Not yet. But part of her, just a fraction, wondered if maybe, just maybe, this man wasn't the villain she'd written about. Maybe he was just another child of power, raised in a castle made of secrets, trying not to drown in the moat. That night, Naomi deleted the draft of her exposé from the cloud, not because she changed her mind, but because she needed to rewrite everything. This wasn't just a scandal about a CEO stealing from the poor. This was a story about power so old it had no fingerprints. And if she was going to burn this dynasty down, she'd have to get closer than ever, even if it meant sleeping next to the one man she no longer wanted to destroy. Naomi Ellis wasn't built for silence. She was raised in a house where truth was sacred, where lies were for politicians and cowards, where her mother taught her to speak even when her voice trembled. Especially then. But now, Naomi found herself lying every day, with her smile, her hand on Julian's arm, her silence in front of cameras. She had stopped writing, not because there was nothing left to say, but because the lines between right and real had begun to blur. She stared at the mirror in the guest bathroom of the penthouse, the kind of mirror that made your flaws disappear and your lies look good. The woman staring back at her wore diamond studs. She wore confidence, but beneath that, Naomi wasn't sure who she was anymore. That evening, they attended a private dinner with board members and political donors. Julian played the part perfectly. He touched her lower back when they entered. He whispered a joke about the caviar. He raised a glass to the woman who makes me believe in second chances. Naomi smiled. So did everyone else. Only she knew her smile had teeth. Back at the penthouse, Naomi kicked off her heels and poured herself a drink. Julian stood at the window again, as if the city gave him answers she never could. "You were good tonight," she said. He turned, slow and tired. "You were better." There was a long pause. Then he walked to the bar, poured a whiskey, and didn't look at her as he said, "I used to think the worst part of my life was being the face of a company I didn't control." Naomi waited. But it wasn't," he continued. "It was realizing that people look at me and assume I'm proud of it." He sipped, quiet. "My mother once told me, 'You will never be seen as a person, Julian. You will be a statement, a brand, a chess piece.'" He glanced at Naomi. "I'm so damn tired of being a headline." Naomi felt her throat tighten, not because she trusted him, but because, for once, she understood him. She too had become a headline, a journalist turned fiancé, A sellout, a liar, a traitor to her own cause. Later that night, Naomi sat at her desk, fingers hovering over her keyboard. The exposé she had planned for months now felt incomplete. She couldn't publish half a truth. But the full truth? She didn't have it yet, because something inside her had changed. Not because of the money, not because of the penthouse or press coverage, but because, somewhere between the staged kisses and the strategic handholds, Julian Blackridge had stopped being the villain in her story, and started being something much more dangerous. Human. Naomi saved the document under a new title. The Lie I Wanted to Believe. She didn't send it. Not yet, but she would, when she was sure. She didn't plan to say it that night. Not over dinner, not in the penthouse, not in that soft, golden light that made everything feel too safe, too real. But the weight of the silence was louder than anything else. Julian had just finished plating dinner, grilled salmon and roasted asparagus, and Naomi couldn't help but think, he still does it, tries to control what's on the plate even when he's not hungry. He sat across from her, no staff, no security. Just two people bound by a contract neither of them had read all the way through. She put down her fork. My name isn't Nora Evans. Julian froze. Naomi exhaled slowly. Her voice stayed calm, but her pulse was sprinting. My real name is Naomi Ellis. I'm not a PR consultant. I'm a journalist. Still no reaction. She went on. I came here to expose your company. I thought you were laundering charity funds. I thought you were just another white billionaire hiding behind buzzwords and tax shelters. She swallowed. I didn't plan on staying. I didn't plan on caring. And I definitely didn't plan on deleting the article I've spent the last 3 years building. Finally, Julian leaned back in his chair. His face was unreadable. But something had shifted. He wasn't angry. He was relieved? I know, he said softly. Naomi blinked. What? Julian folded his hands. I knew by the 3rd week. Your background didn't hold up. The French line was cute, by the way. Naomi felt heat rush to her face. Then why the hell didn't you say anything? He shrugged, almost tired. Because for once, someone walked into my life not trying to impress me, not trying to manipulate me for shares or access or headlines. He stood and walked to the window. You came with an agenda, but at least it was honest. Naomi stood too. Honest? I lied to your face for months. Julian turned. Yes, but you also listened. You stayed. You asked questions no one's ever dared to ask me. And now you know the truth. A long silence. Then he walked back to the table and placed a simple, cream-colored envelope in front of her. This is yours. Naomi hesitated, then opened it. Inside, a revised contract. No PR events, no marriage clause, no payment terms. Just one sentence. You may tell this story, but only if you tell all of it. She looked up, stunned. You're letting me write the exposé? Julian nodded. But not the version you started with. Not the evil CEO fantasy that makes headlines but never changes anything. Tell the truth, Naomi, about the company, about me, about Vivian, about what power really does when no one's watching. Naomi sat back down, overwhelmed. She had expected a threat, a cover-up, a buyout. But this was trust. Later that night, alone in her room, Naomi opened a blank document. Title, What Power Doesn't Want You to Know, and what one man was willing to risk to tell it. Below that, she typed one line. This started as a lie, but sometimes the best stories begin exactly where the truth was never supposed to be. It started with a headache, then the nausea, then the dizzy spell that sent her reaching for the marble countertop in the penthouse kitchen as the room tilted just slightly, like the whole world was a camera off balance. Naomi didn't panic at first, until she counted the days. Then the panic set in. The test turned positive in less than 5 seconds. It was the first time Naomi Ellis had been rendered speechless since she was 12. She sat on the floor of the luxurious guest bathroom, still in the white robe embroidered with BGV, holding a plastic stick like it was a detonator. No, she whispered. No, 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 no. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was a fake marriage. This was a story. This was a takedown, not a damn love story. And definitely not a family. She didn't tell Julian. Not that day. Not the next. Not even after he made her pancakes from scratch 2 mornings in a row. He had never made pancakes before, but she saw the effort in the flour on his shirt cuffs, the cinnamon he remembered she liked, the messy shape of the heart he tried to pour on the skillet and wouldn't admit to. "You're smiling," he said when he caught her watching. "I'm confused," she replied. "I'll take it," he said. Naomi smiled again, and that scared her even more, because this was no longer just about truth or justice. It was about survival, her survival and someone else's. Julian Blackridge called a surprise dinner meeting the next night. She showed up in pearls, flawless makeup, and a tone that could cut glass. "Naomi, darling," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we haven't had any alone time since this whirlwind engagement." Julian stiffened beside Naomi, but she squeezed his hand under the table, a silent warning. Vivian sipped her wine. "You know, my late husband used to say, the real power doesn't shout, it smiles while it signs the check." She turned her eyes toward Naomi. "You've learned to smile beautifully." Naomi met her gaze, calm. "Thank you, journalism teaches you that." Vivian's smile cracked. Julian cleared his throat. "Vivian, we're not here to what? Acknowledge that this arrangement is no longer pretend?" Vivian's voice was velvet over steel. "You're glowing, Naomi. That's not from publicity." A beat. Silence. Too long. Naomi's hand trembled slightly under the tablecloth, but she didn't blink. "Stress will do that to a woman," she said. "Running from gossip, chasing truth, playing pretend." Vivian tilted her head. "I see. Well, be careful what you chase. You may find it turns around." Back at the penthouse, Julian poured bourbon but didn't drink it. Naomi stood in the doorway of the kitchen, still holding her purse, still holding the secret inside her. "I need to tell you something," she said. Julian turned, but the words didn't come. "Not yet." She blinked back the fear. "Not tonight." Later, lying in bed, she placed her hand gently over her stomach. There was a tiny life forming inside her. Fragile, unseen, but undeniable. Naomi had spent her whole life chasing truth. Now she was carrying one. And it was growing louder by the day. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday that pretends to be calm. Blue sky, perfect breeze, coffee not too bitter. The kind that makes you forget the storm is already on its way. Naomi was in a car, halfway to an editorial shoot for Vogue business, when her phone exploded with notifications. Group chats, DMs, email alerts, subject lines like landmines. Breaking. Wife of billionaire CEO has secret past as undercover reporter. Was Julian Blackridge duped? From journalism to gold digging? The headline that broke her. Sleeping with the Story, Naomi Ellis and the Lie of the Year. Posted by the Daily Ledger, a conservative outlet with a clear agenda and a long history of attacking black professionals. And at the bottom of it, photos from her deleted expose draft. Quotes. An anonymous corporate source. Even a clipped line from her private conversations with Julian. She didn't have to guess where the leak came from. Vivian. Naomi stormed into the penthouse 2 hours later. Hair disheveled, anger vibrating through her bones. Julian was already pacing, holding a printed copy of the article. "I didn't know she'd go this far," he said, voice tight. Naomi's eyes were sharp. "No? This is the same woman who built an empire on laundering goodwill. Naomi, she's not just trying to end my career, she's trying to erase me." Julian looked at her. Really looked. Not like a CEO calculating risk, but like a man watching the woman he loved burn. "Then let me show you who I really am," he said. "No cameras, no PR, no contracts." The next morning, Julian Blackridge walked into a packed press room with Naomi by his side. The air was knives and whispers. Vivian had expected him to stay silent, to distance himself, to save the company. Instead, He cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone. 3 months ago, I invited Naomi Ellis into my world under false pretenses. But what the world doesn't know is, she already knew more about it than most of you ever will. Gasps, pens froze mid-sentence. Yes, Naomi is a journalist. Yes, she came here with an agenda. But it wasn't to manipulate me. It was to find truth in a system built on smoke and mirrors. And what she found was me. And what I found was someone brave enough to tell the story, even if it meant losing everything. Julian reached for Naomi's hand. I'm not losing her. By the time the press conference ended, Fontre toward Julian and Naomi was trending worldwide. Some praised it as romantic. Some called it corporate manipulation. Vivian called it reckless. She confronted Julian at the Blackridge estate that evening. Pearls off, gloves on. You think this little performance saves you? She hissed. You think love protects you from legacy? Julian didn't flinch. Love is legacy, he said. You taught me power is everything, but Naomi taught me why it matters. This ends now, Vivian. That night, Naomi sat on the penthouse balcony. Barefoot, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, one hand resting on her stomach. Julian joined her silently, placing a mug of tea beside her. You didn't have to do that, she whispered. You didn't have to stay, he replied. And between them, no lies, no headlines, just heat, silence, and a quiet kind of safety. Vivian Blackridge didn't go quietly. She held press conferences, threatened lawsuits, called Naomi a media manipulator and Julian unfit. But what she couldn't silence was the audit. When government investigators opened the books on the Meridia Foundation, the truth poured out like oil from a cracked pipe. Fake NGOs. Political contributions masked as scholarships. Millions funneled through shell charities. And at the center of it all, Vivian, the woman who had raised Julian to carry a name, not a soul. She was indicted on federal charges 2 weeks later. And Julian? He never said, I told you so. He just sat beside Naomi in the courthouse hallway, hand resting on hers. They didn't celebrate, but they breathed. And that was enough. 3 days after the press stopped camping outside their building, Naomi finally pulled out the printed draft of her exposé. Julian had never asked to read it again. He didn't have to. She walked into the penthouse study, dropped it on his desk, and said, It's not about you anymore. He flipped to the first line. It's about how the truth almost lost. She smiled. Almost. Her article went viral in 24 hours. Not for the scandal, not for the name-dropping, but for this line, love without truth is performance, but truth without love is war, and we had enough war. Naomi didn't just write an exposé. She started a national conversation about trust, about power, about who gets to rewrite the ending. Spring came early that year. So did contractions. Naomi gave birth on a Sunday morning. No cameras, no headlines, no drama. Just her, Julian, and a baby girl with soft curls and a scream that could shatter crystal. Julian cried first. Naomi teased him about it for days. But in truth, they both wept, because this wasn't supposed to happen. Because neither of them believed they deserved it. Because they had rewritten every rule they thought was written in stone. They named her Nova, not after the stars, but because she came from fire, and still found a way to shine. A month later, Julian knelt beside the hospital bed with a velvet box. No photographers. No prenup. No script. There's no contract this time, he said. Only if you want forever. Naomi smiled through tears. Forever, she whispered. But only if we keep telling the truth. They sealed it with a kiss, not perfect, but honest. The kind of kiss that tasted like survival. And the last thing Naomi ever published under her old byline? Just 5 words. A headline. A vow. No more lies. Just love. If this story made you feel something, hope, anger, fear, or maybe belief that love can still be real even when it starts with a lie, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. because somewhere out there, someone else needs to know. Truth doesn't always come in headlines. Sometimes it comes in hearts.